Hey, get those kids out of here. This isn't a playground. Linda Carver's voice sliced through the quiet afternoon like a siren. Ryan Miller froze, watching his 7-year-old son clutch a soccer ball with wide eyes. It wasn't the first time she had screamed at the neighborhood kids, but this time it was his child. Linda marched across the grass, her face red with rage. "If that ball even touches my yard, you'll be hearing from my lawyer," she snapped, practically spitting the words at him. Ryan couldn't help but laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. A lawyer? Over a kid playing soccer in the common area? He looked her in the eye and said calmly, "Go ahead." But even as he said it, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Linda wasn't bluffing. She had friends on the HOA board, including the president himself. And before I go further, if you've ever dealt with a crazy neighbor or a power-hungry HOA, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who will appreciate the drama, because this one only gets worse. A week later, Ryan opened his mailbox and felt his blood boil. A letter from the HOA board, signed neatly by President Greg Walters, claimed that children were no longer permitted to play soccer or football in the common area. The space that had always been the heart of the neighborhood, where families gathered, where kids learned to ride bikes, was suddenly off limits. And everyone knew exactly whose complaint had sparked it. Linda Carver. Ryan's hands trembled as he read the words over and over. This wasn't just about his son. This was an attack on every family in the community. He could almost picture Linda's smug grin as she dropped the letter off at Greg's house, knowing she had the power to dictate the lives of others. For a moment, Ryan considered ignoring it, but his anger flared hotter. He wouldn't let one bitter woman and her friends on the board steal childhood from his son or from anyone else's kids. That night, he sat at his kitchen table pounding the keys of his laptop with determination. He wrote a fierce response, pointing out that restricting children from common areas was not only unfair, but also illegal under federal housing law. He reminded the board in no uncertain terms that families had rights, and if they tried to enforce this, he was ready to fight back and win. When he sealed the envelope and dropped it into the outgoing mail, he felt a surge of satisfaction. But deep down, he knew the war had only begun, because Linda and the HOA president weren't going to let this slide quietly, and Ryan was about to find out just how far they were willing to go to shut him down. The letter was barely out of Ryan's hands before the retaliation began. It started quietly. Neighbors who once waved at him across the street now looked the other way. The same moms who used to let their kids play with his son suddenly made excuses. And in the evenings, Ryan could see Linda chatting on the sidewalk with the HOA president, Greg Walters, her arms crossed and her smirk wide, like she'd already won. The gossip was spreading. One Friday night, as Ryan carried groceries into the house, he noticed something tucked under his doormat. At first, he thought it was just an advertisement, but when he unfolded the crumpled paper, his stomach dropped. In scratchy black marker, the note read, "Control your kid, or else." No signature, no explanation, just a warning dripping with hostility. Ryan stood frozen in the doorway, his son playing video games inside, completely unaware of the venom aimed at him. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal, and Linda made sure he knew it. Every time the kids so much as laughed too loudly near the common area, she would storm outside, arms flailing, screaming about noise and property values. One afternoon, Ryan caught her snapping pictures of his son and a couple of neighborhood boys kicking a ball. Her phone angled like she was gathering evidence. When he confronted her, she smiled coldly and said, "Just making sure the HOA sees what you're letting happen." Ryan clenched his fists, forcing himself not to lose it right there. He knew that was exactly what she wanted. An angry outburst she could twist into another complaint. Instead, he walked away, but inside, the anger burned hotter. How could one woman twist the entire neighborhood against him? How could the HOA president, someone elected to represent all homeowners, stand by her side so blindly? For a few days, Ryan tried to shake it off. He told himself to focus on his family, that maybe it would blow over. But then a new letter arrived in the mail. This one wasn't just about kids playing in the common area. It accused Ryan of endangering property. and warned that continued violations could result in fines and even legal action. Ryan's heart pounded as he read the words. They weren't just harassing him anymore. They were coming after him officially with threats backed by the HOA board. And if they thought he'd back down, they had no idea who they were messing with, because Ryan was ready to fight fire with fire. The new HOA letter shook Ryan to his core. It wasn't just a warning, it spelled out fines. Hundreds of dollars for each so-called child disturbance. The words leapt off the page like a threat. Continued violations may result in legal action. He could almost hear Linda's voice behind every sentence, smug and dripping with satisfaction. She had gone from empty threats to real weapons, and she was using the HOA board as her shield. Ryan refused to panic. Instead, he got smart. He started documenting everything. He made copies of the letters, dated every envelope, and even set up a camera by his front porch to catch Linda's late-night prowling. Whenever she screamed at kids for laughing too loudly, he recorded her. Whenever she stomped across the grass to bark about rules, he wrote it down. If they wanted a fight, he was going to have a paper trail, but Linda wasn't done. She had another trick up her sleeve. Every time children played outside, even if it wasn't Ryan's son, she called the police with noise complaints. Officers showed up twice in a single week, clearly uncomfortable, clearly annoyed. One even muttered, "We can't keep coming out here for kids playing soccer." Ryan knew what she was doing, trying to create a record of disturbances so the HOA could twist it against him. The hypocrisy made Ryan sick, because while Linda screamed about rules and order, she was breaking the HOA's biggest one herself. Everyone in the neighborhood knew she ran a used car business out of her house, and every day she parked her dealer cars in the guest parking, taking up not one, not two, but 3 spots. Families with actual visitors couldn't find space because Linda had turned the lot into her personal car showroom. Ryan gritted his teeth every time he saw it. He hadn't complained. He believed in letting neighbors live their lives, but now he wondered if it was time to use her own game against her. Should he report it? Expose her to the same rules she shoved down everyone else's throat? He was leaning toward yes. But before he could make his move, a sharp knock rattled his front door late one evening. When Ryan opened it, there stood Greg Walters, the HOA president himself, smiling too wide, his hands folded like a man ready to bargain or threaten, and with that, Ryan realized the fight had just moved to his doorstep. Greg Walters stood on Ryan's porch like he owned the place, his blazer pressed sharp, his smile stretched thin. "Evening, Ryan," he said smoothly, like this was some friendly neighborhood chat. But Ryan knew better. The man's eyes gave him away. Cold, calculating, already sizing him up. "I think we need to talk," Greg continued, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "There's been tension. I'm here to clear things up." Ryan crossed his arms. "Tension? Greg, your board sent me letters threatening fines because kids are playing in the common area. That's not tension. That's harassment." Greg chuckled lightly, ignoring the edge in Ryan's voice. "Let's not use words like harassment. This is just about maintaining order. You know how things can get if we don't enforce rules. Property values, complaints from residents." He trailed off, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Ryan could feel the anger rising in his chest. "Complaints from residents? Or complaints from Linda?" Greg's smile faltered for just a second before returning, tighter this time. "Linda's concerns are valid. And frankly, if you'd just cooperate, none of this would be an issue." "Cooperate?" Ryan repeated. "You mean roll over and let her ban children from playing outside?" Greg's eyes hardened, the fake friendliness gone. "You don't want the whole board against you. That would make things difficult. Sometimes it's easier to go along than to fight." The threat was clear as day. Ryan stared at him, stunned by how openly the president of the HOA was siding with one bitter woman. He realized in that moment this wasn't just Linda, it was bigger. The entire board was backing her, and they were willing to twist the rules, intimidate families, and isolate anyone who stood up. When Greg finally left, Ryan sat down at his dining table, fists clenched. The weight of the fight pressed on him, heavier than ever. This wasn't going to stop, not unless he made it stop, so he picked up the phone and called an old college friend who practiced law. After a long conversation, the lawyer's words gave him a spark of hope. What they're doing is textbook discrimination. Keep your records. You've got a case, and it's strong. Ryan hung up with a new fire in his chest. He wasn't just defending his son anymore. He was preparing for war. But before he could act, Linda made her boldest, dirtiest move yet. It happened on a Saturday morning. The sun was barely up when Ryan heard a furious knock at his door. He opened it to find Linda standing there, her phone in hand, snapping pictures before he could even say a word. "Your kid destroyed my fence," she barked, pointing toward her backyard. "That soccer ball of his cracked one of the posts." "You'll be paying for this," Ryan blinked, stunned. His son was still inside in his pajamas, eating cereal and watching cartoons. "He hasn't even been outside today," Ryan said flatly. But Linda didn't care. She stormed off, shouting over her shoulder, "You'll hear from the board!" Sure enough, by Monday, another letter slid into his mailbox. This one was worse than anything before. The HOA was demanding $2,000 for property damage to Linda's fence, threatening to tack on additional fines if he refused to pay. Ryan's hands shook as he read it. This wasn't a rule anymore. This was extortion, but Ryan wasn't alone. When he talked to a couple of neighbors, they admitted they'd seen Linda's fence leaning for months, long before his son ever kicked a ball near it. One neighbor even shook his head and muttered, "She's setting you up, man." For the first time, Ryan felt a flicker of support. Maybe people were finally waking up. That night, he spread all his evidence across the dining table. Every letter, every photo, every recording. He looked at the folder he'd built against Linda and the HOA, and for the first time he realized he had more than enough to fight back. But instead of quietly defending himself, he made a decision. He wasn't going to just survive this. He was going to expose them. Ryan grabbed his phone and snapped photos of Linda's dealer cars hogging the guest parking spaces. He compiled the dates, times, and even the state plates. He included screenshots of the HOA's own rules about commercial use of property. Then, with steady fingers, he drafted a full report addressed not only to the HOA board, but also to the County Housing Authority. He reread it twice, then pressed send. For the first time in months, he felt like the power was shifting. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. What he didn't realize was just how explosive the fallout was about to be. The fallout came faster than Ryan expected. Within a week, the County Housing Authority responded, and their tone was icy. They reminded the HOA board that under the Fair Housing Act, they could not discriminate against children or restrict them from common areas. Any attempt to enforce such rules could expose the association to serious legal consequences. The board suddenly went silent. The threatening letters stopped overnight, and then the real bombshell dropped. Ryan's report on Linda's car business spread like wildfire. Copies of the photos and violations circulated among the neighbors, some who had stayed quiet until now. Families who had been avoiding Ryan suddenly walked up to him, shaking their heads in disbelief. "All this time she was breaking the rules herself," one father said. Another mom whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner. She scared us all." The HOA scrambled in panic, desperate to distance themselves from Linda. The board quietly announced that guest parking would now be strictly monitored and that commercial vehicles were prohibited. Everyone knew exactly who they were talking about. Linda stopped parking her dealer cars overnight, and for the first time in years, the guest lot was actually open to guests. But Linda herself? She vanished. No more screaming across the lawn. No more snapping photos of kids. No more marching to the board with her endless complaints. Neighbors said she barely came outside anymore, her influence shattered. Her reign of intimidation finally over. One evening, Ryan stood at the edge of the green space, watching his son laugh and kick a soccer ball with a group of kids. The sound of their joy filled the air, echoing across the neighborhood. For the first time in months, Ryan felt peace. He had fought back, not just for his own child, but for every family who had been bullied into silence. And he won. But he knew something else, too. This fight wasn't just about rules. It was about standing up when no one else will, about protecting the simple right of kids to be kids, and about reminding bullies that no matter how loud they shout, the truth speaks louder. So if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen or a neighbor who thought they could control your life, Don't let them. Speak up. Document everything. Fight back. And most importantly, don't back down, because sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to fight for it. If you want more stories like this, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe, because the next battle with the HOA is one you don't want to miss.